Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for dialing into our webinar session this morning. My name is Misha Bristow, and I am the Business Development Manager here at Paycheck. We are putting this webinar together for you today in order to share with you the latest updates that were released on Friday to get you all up to speed with what those changes are that are involved, both from a payroll and a HR perspective. I'm joined this morning by my colleague Katie and Monica and Martin from Krona. They will be discussing the HR, and Katie will be discussing the payroll side of the updates. So Katie, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thanks, Misha. Hi, everyone. Some of you will know me. I've worked at Paycheck for 16 years, in payroll for 18 for my sins. So what I'm here to do today is to try and put into context some of the changes in the guidance as to how you would apply it to then submitting your payroll information. And at the end, I'll just take you through one of the basic examples of the payroll calculations, and then just talk through where you can find all the examples from HMRC for any of your kind of live examples, and help you to be able to get ready for those changes coming up.
Thank you. Martin?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Martin Vodden. I'm Business Development Manager for Krona. We partner with Paycheck to provide employment law, HR and health and safety guidance for our clients and for Paycheck clients as well. Just following on from what Misha said, really, the idea of today is to give you an idea of how the scheme is going to adapt over the coming months, what that means for employers and how the scheme will draw to a close in October. And then following the webinar, I'll send an email just referencing Krona's support and how we can assist employers in navigating around the contract law side of it as well.
Perfect. Thank you. So if I run you through the agenda for today's session, we have got a lot to get through. There was a lot that was released on Friday. We have scheduled an hour for today's session, but depending on how many questions that we get through, because I'm sure they will generate a lot, may slightly overrun. So, but this session will be recorded. So if you do have to run off to another meeting, or if there is something else that you want to refer back to, we will send a follow-up email tomorrow with the recording, so you can refer back at any point. So Monica will be running through with you this morning exactly what the job retention scheme is and what furlough is, introducing flexible furlough and running you through that aspect. We'll also be explaining the pay element, the government, what that means for national living wage and national minimum wage. We'll also be explaining record keeping for employers, working during flexible furlough and what that means. All things to do with maternity, education for children, how to make a claim, the changes to the portal, holiday, and then Katie will be running you through those payroll calculations that she mentioned. And as I said, there will be a question and answer session at the end. Please keep your questions coming throughout the session today. There is a question box on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you just pop anything through on there, we'll do our best to get through as many as we can today. If there's any that we need to follow up on, then we can do so. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Monica, who will run you through the presentation for this morning.
Hello, good morning, everybody. My name is Monica Price, and I'm a health and safety consultant with Krona. So it's lovely to be here again. Thank you so much to Misha and Katie for having us here today. And yes, let's start then. So what is the job retention scheme, furlough? Well, you've probably heard of the scheme already, but as always, the situation is very fluid at the moment. And as Martin is seeing his clients on a regular basis, albeit via webinars at the moment, you know, because this is a fluid situation, it's really important that you need to keep up to date. And what we're going to do today is discuss the latest changes as we see as of today. So the job retention scheme, it was built around furlough, is a scheme that the government have introduced to all companies to not require people to work, but they were obviously still being paid 80% of their work salary and their wages as long as they met the criteria. It's completely separate to a layoff or a shortage of work. So furlough in its original sense means no work and no pay. However, the scheme overrides that no pay element and requires employers to pay 80% of wage to employees, which the employer can then recover. So I think we're all kind of quite aware of this scheme, but as I say, it's important now that there have been quite significant changes which is going to affect you. So let's take a look. So what is flexible furlough? Well, flexible furlough is indeed, that's what it's being called, and it's from the 1st of July this year, of course. Furloughed staff will be able to be brought back to work on a part-time basis. Now, this obviously is very new. There is criteria which we're going to run through today, but previously staff placed on furlough have been able to do no work for the company or an associated organisation if the company wished to claim 80% of their wages from the government. However, the flexible furlough means that they can now be brought back to work part-time and the company can still claim the grant. So this is quite a significant change. This means that employers will still be able to claim the furlough grant for the hours their flexible furloughed employees do not work compared to the hours they would normally have worked in that period. So the idea of it is that you can bring your employees back to the workplace but still be able to claim this furloughed grant on a part-time basis. So who does this scheme apply to? Well, from the 1st of July, only employees that their employer has previously successfully claimed a previous grant for will be eligible for more grants under the scheme. So in other words, to be able to apply for this flexible furlough, you have to have previously had more people on furlough within your employment. So again, if there's any confusion over that, Martin's here to take any questions, of course. And as Misha said, any questions during the course of this webinar, please just flag them up and we'll do our best to answer them. So this means that they must have previously been furloughed for at least 3 consecutive weeks, taking place any time between the 1st of March and the 30th of June. So for the minimum 3 consecutive week period to be completed by 30th of June, the last day an employer could have started furlough for the first time was the 10th of June. So of course the cut-off date has passed, but again, it's a very fluid situation. And as you're aware, and as we're talking today, things are changing all the time. So this does not apply to staff returning from maternity or paternity or adoption or any shared parental or parental bereavement leave. They can still be placed on furlough even if they've not been on furlough before. And in fact, we've had an updated group of people that can be added to that list now. So there's only 2 groups really, and those are military reservists. So if any military reservists are returning from service, then they too can apply for the full furlough scheme. So employers should have a discussion with employees who they wish to place on the flexible furlough scheme because they need to agree the arrangements for their part-time work. Now, this is really important. We've just heard today, in fact, that the law is going to be introduced next month to deal with employers who exploit the job retention scheme. There's already been reports of many employers who are exploiting the scheme, who are, for example, claiming wages under the scheme, but still requiring their employees to work. And also others have furloughed their staff without telling them. So, but part of the arrangement is the employer has to get the agreement from their employee to be able to furlough their staff. And of course, they have to know that they're receiving the 80% pay. So the new law is expected to give employers a 30-day grace period. And this is to, if you like, confess to the HMRC of the mistakes that are being made. And Martin's already seeing this with clients. Genuine mistakes, of course, are going to happen and those will be taken into consideration. But be under no, misapprehension. The HMRC is on it because people are exploiting this scheme. So the agreement should be confirmed in writing and employers must keep a written record of the agreement for 5 years. So employers do not need to place all of their employees on furlough And in addition, they can continue to fully furlough employees if they wish. So this means that furloughed employees do not have to be brought back part-time. It's entirely up to you. And again, there's been some confusion about this because everybody's thinking about, right, what should we do? We need to get back on track now. Obviously, shops are opening now. We are breaking down our lockdown period slowly but surely. We're coming back to what we call the new normal. So lots of employees are confused as to what action they should do for their staff. So, you don't have to bring them back on part-time. You can bring them back full-time, but this is just another option for you if, of course, there isn't any financial concerns, or if indeed you're kind of building up your business at the moment. So flexible furlough agreements can last any amount of time. So this means that they do not need to last for the minimum of 3 weeks, as previously in the job retention scheme before. So, however, that period the employers claim for must be a minimum period of 7 calendar days. So you can furlough your staff, flexible furlough your staff for less than that, but you won't get any grant. It has to be a period of 7 calendar days. And employees that can enter into a flexible furlough agreement more than once. So again, this is giving you, if you like, the flexibility, hence the name, it's giving you the flexibility to allow you to get your staff back in use this staggered approach, which is what the government is requiring you to do, and to ensure that you can have the minimum amount of people in and the maximum amount of output for your staff. So again, you might just do this over a weekly basis if that suits your business. Again, it's completely up to you, but this flexible furlough is going to be just that. It's a great scheme to enable you to bring back your staff slowly, enable you to get back onto track. And some of you may have already been working flat out all the way through the furlough period. So this may be something you might even think about now. So again, all these things, all these questions you're asking yourself, this is really a helping hand to say, look, the government have said we're here to help. Let's try this flexible furlough and let's just see if it works. So let's look at the pay element. Well, currently employers need to pay furloughed employees at least 80% of their usual monthly earnings, up to a maximum of 2,500. The government then reimburse employers through the scheme, including providing employer contributions to national insurance and pension. This is what's been happening at the moment. Employers claimed for a minimum of 3 weeks and were able to choose to pay employees more than the grant, but they did not have to. Now, again, we've spoken to many employers who have, in fact, topped up the 80% to give the employee 100% of their salary. But again, it's not a legal requirement, and you didn't have to do that. Employees still paid income tax, national insurance contributions, and any other deductions from wages. But this now is going to change going forward. And this is where it's quite a significant change. If you haven't already heard, this is what we're going to be discussing, during this webinar, because it is quite a significant change. And as an employer, you need to be aware of the changes and what your needs and what you have to do to protect yourself, your business, and of course, your employees. So paying staff on flexible furlough. Well, from the 1st of July, employers will pay the employee for the hours they work, along with their national insurance contributions and pension contributions for all those hours. The scheme will allow employers to recover the remainder of the wages to a maximum cap. Now, wage caps are proportional to the hours an employee is furloughed. So, for an example, an employee is entitled to 60% of the 2,500 cap if they are placed on furlough for 60% of their usual hours. And that is the way to work it out. And again, Martin's on hand here. If you've got any specific questions about this, then, please just ask away. But, it is going to be, it's a little bit tricky. You may be thinking, I don't know what to do. Do I need to put my staff on flexible furlough? Is this going to allow me to actually, make the business more profitable? Is this going to be beneficial for me as a business? So again, each individual business is going to have an individual requirement. So it's really important that you don't just jump on these schemes and use it, because it might not be appropriate for what you need to do as far as your business is concerned. So claims under the new scheme will be open from the 1st of July. So when claiming for employees who are flexible furloughed, employers should not claim until they're sure of the exact number of hours they will have worked during the claim period. And this is going to be really important. You've got to really sit down and ascertain exactly the hours, the number of hours that you want your staff to be working. So this means that employers should claim when they have a certainty about the number of hours their employees are working during the claim period. So because this is important that you get it right now, because obviously once you do this, you're not going to be able to change it. So if employers claim in advance and their employee works for more hours than they have told the HMRC about, then they will have to pay some of the grant back to the HMRC. So again, it's just all about really making sure that you've got all your policies, contracts, your procedures in order, and making sure you've sat down and really worked out how many staff you're going to put on the flexible furlough and what sort of hours that you need to have them working with you. So from the 1st of August, now these are the changes that are in place, which you may have or may not already heard from the media. So from the 1st of August, the employers will need to start paying pension and national insurance contributions for the time furloughed staff are not working. So that's quite a significant change. From the 1st of September, employers will need to start contributing 10% of the 80% grant given to the furloughed workers, as well as their national insurance contributions as well, and their any pension. And from the 1st of October, the same, but we just move up a little bit. The employers will need to start contributing 20% of the 80%, and you need to pay obviously the national insurance and the pension scheme. And then the scheme will close in its entirety at the end of October. Now, as Martin will tell you, this is a very fluid situation. We are seeing changes almost on a daily basis, but for the moment, we are aware that it's going to be the end of October. We're not expecting the scheme to be put more in advance from then. We think October will be the stop date for all of this. So it's really important that if you're looking to do this, again, you have a procedure and you have some idea about where your business is going. Now, the national living wage or national minimum wage, the pay when on furlough does not have to meet the national minimum wage or the living age, because these rates are only payable for hours worked. And that's the key thing. This is why the new law is going to come in next month, because lots of employees have put their staff on furlough and they've continued to work. The whole point of furlough is that you put your staff on furlough and they do not work. The only thing they can do on a furlough is do some training. That's it. So obviously in this circumstance, it's online training. However, furloughed workers who return part-time will need to be paid at their usual rate by their employer, which must not dip below the national minimum wage. So again, there's quite a significant difference there, as you can see, because anything below the national minimum wage has always been against the law. So it's really important that, again, you're working out exactly the number of hours that you expect in your employee to work. Keeping records. I think you're all aware now, everything's got to be kept. And absolutely this, employers need to keep records of how many hours their employees work and the number of hours they are furloughed during this flexible furlough. So in other words, somebody's got to keep a really, really accurate account as to what exactly is happening to that particular employee. So for example, employers will need to record that an employee who normally works, say, for 37 hours a week is actually working for 15 hours, but is being furloughed for the 22 hours. So you can see how important it is. Record keeping is going to be really important. So if you've got an HR department, obviously they will be on top of this. If it's one person, if it's just perhaps a part-time person, you need to really be considering to make sure that these records are going to be kept accurately and of course up to date. So as I've said, working during the flexible furlough. So during flexible furlough, employees are not allowed to do any work for the employers, exactly the same as for the mainstream furlough scheme or any linked or associated organisation during the periods that they are recorded as being on furlough. And this is you're going to be held to account if you do this. So it's really important that, as I say, that you get this right. Employees on flexible furlough can do training, as I've said, during the hours that they are recorded as being on furlough, but must be paid at least national minimum wage for those hours that they're doing some training for you. So again, big difference, and it's really important that you get that right. So calculating working hours. If an employee is flexible furloughed, employers need to work out their employees' usual hours. So whatever they normally do, and then record the actual hours they work as well as their furloughed hours for each claim period. So there are two different calculations they can use to work out their employees' usual hours, depending on whether they work fixed or, of course, if they work variable hours. So employers should work out usual hours for employees who work variable hours if either, for example, their employee is not contracted to a fixed number of hours, and that may be the case for some of you, or their employees' pay depends on the number of hours they work. So you can see it's going to be really important that you've got some kind of calculation going on here, because this is going to determine exactly the period that they're going to be furloughed, which of course they cannot work, and of course the normal hours of pay, if you like, the normal hours, the usual hours that they will be working for you. So where the employee's working hours are fixed, for example, or their pay does not vary with the amount of hours worked, the reference period for calculating their usual hours is the hours they're contracted for at the end of the last pay period, ending on or before the 19th of March 2020. So where an employee works variable hours, employers will use the higher of the average number of hours worked in the tax year 2019 to 2020, or the corresponding calendar period in the tax year 2019 to 2020. So again, really important, as I've said, that when you're calculating these working hours, you're getting it right. Now let's look at maternity considerations. Well, again, this has changed since the furlough scheme first was introduced, but currently employees on maternity leave could be furloughed provided they were receiving at least 80% of pay during their leave. So again, this is something you would need to check. Those receiving statutory maternity pay, SMP as it's known, could not be furloughed due to not being in receipt of 80% pay, and the SMP is recoverable through existing means in any case. So the 10th of June cut-off date, which of course has now passed, does not apply to those on maternity or paternity, adoption, shared paternity, or any parental bereavement leave. And of course, as I've said, this also includes the military reservists now. They can be furloughed for the first time on their return period. The employers have previously furloughed other employees. So there's, as I say, there's only these two groups. There's this group and the military currently, as of today. If employees about to go on maternity leave has seen their earnings reduced due to a period on furlough or statutory sick pay prior to their maternity leave starting, then their normal pay should be used to calculate their SMP. And the same principle applies to contractual adoption pay, paternity pay, and any shared parental pay. So let's look at education, early years and the children's social care sectors. Well, extra conditions have been put in place for these particular areas, so which may restrict employers in these sectors for using the scheme, whether the full furlough scheme or the flexible furlough. So the government expects all relevant organisations to consider options to reduce their operating costs and secure the commercial loans before utilising the scheme. And obviously you've got, the COVID-19 loan, and you've also got the bounce back loan as well for small businesses. So educational settings that are in receipt of some public funding should only furlough employees in certain circumstances. So again, it's just important to think about what you need to do as a business. It may well be that furloughed staff, that you may already have some people on furloughed staff, and this scheme, the flexible furlough scheme, is going to work for you. But be mindful to remember that they cannot work on any of the furloughed schemes, either the full scheme or the flexible furlough. So if you're expecting them to work, then this scheme isn't going to be right for you. So how do you make a claim? Well, the online portal to make a claim became available on the 20th of April. And again, it was hit immediately with thousands and thousands of claims, but the portal hasn't crashed. It hasn't crashed since it's been open. So employers should make the claim in accordance with actual payroll amounts at the point at which payroll is run or in advance of any imminent payroll. And employers must pay the employee all of the grant. This is unfortunately what we're seeing. Employers get the grant themselves, and then of course they have to pass it on to the employee, and that's what some employers have not been doing. But employers must pay the employee all the grant they receive for their gross pay, and no fees can be charged from the money that is granted. And this will be the same when applying for the flexible furlough wages. Exactly the same principles will apply. So the portal itself, well, there's a step-by-step guide on the coronavirus job retention scheme, which is available from the government online. So just go on to gov.co.uk and you can log in using your government gateway ID. But please note there is now a save and return option should you need to take a break, whereas previously that wasn't there, and you had about 30 minutes to make this claim. Now you can save and return because you might have to go back, or you might have to just to take a phone call. It's life in business, or you just need to get some more information and you need to come back to your claim a bit later on in the day. Once submitted, though, you will see a claim confirmation number. This will not be emailed to you, so ensure you print or make a note of that number. So again, really important, take a screen grab, do something, because you're not going to get an email. Calculations should be retained, as the HMRC may request these. So any paperwork you've done prior to this applying for the flexible furlough, please make sure you keep everything. And claims will be processed and paid within 6 days. So again, the HMRC have been very quick on the uptake of this, and payments is usually seen within a week. So holidays and furlough, or annual leave, can be taken at the same time as furlough, but the employer must top up payment for holiday up to 100%. So if you've got someone on furlough and they want to take an annual leave during that time, then you've got to up that from the 80%, you've got to up it to 100%. So in other words, they're getting 100% of their salary. If employees usually take bank holidays, for example, as a holiday, then employers will either have to top up to 100% or you can give them a day off in lieu. Employers can have a rule that there's no annual leave to be taken during furlough. And again, Martin will tell you when he's talking to businesses, this has been a little bit of a contention because we're not sure what to do. Businesses have been unsure whether to let them take furlough. Don't forget, when an employee requests leave whilst they're on furlough, you still can refuse annual leave. So, but what's happening now, because of obviously the COVID-19, it's now possible to carry 4 weeks of leave to the next 2 holiday years if it's not reasonably practical to take during obviously this coronavirus. So again, this is going to be something, and we're getting lots of questions on annual leave because it's really important, because you need to ascertain exactly the kind of business day that how your business runs, because what you don't want is to have suddenly lots of your employees suddenly come up to you and say, I need to take annual leave, because now it's going to be carried forward to the next 2 holiday years. That might be just not practical for your business. And of course, bear in mind, currently we still have the quarantine period. Now that the government's actually talking today on Sky News, talking about that's actually under review today. But again, at the moment, currently, you have to go in if you're returning from any country outside the UK, not any of the France is one of them, and I believe there's 2 others where you can return from and you don't have to go into quarantine. But if you're going on holiday, majority of the places that you visit, when you come back to the UK, your employer will have to go into 14 days quarantine. Now you've got to imagine then, if they've requested 1 week's leave, for example, you've actually got to be aware that they're actually going to be off work for 3 weeks. And currently, again, as Martin will tell you, the government are looking at what happens in that pay period, while they take that 2 weeks of quarantine. And again, that's under review currently. So again, it's very fluid. So you need to be aware and you need to be very mindful. This is a really good time to seek professional advice before you do anything, because it's such a fluid situation. So payroll calculations. Now, I think I'm handing over to Katie for this. Is that correct?
That's right. Yes, the exciting part.
Yeah.
So
I'll
what I
hand over
thought.
to Katie.
Thank you. What I thought would be useful is for us to work through just a really basic example of a calculation. There are about 1 million example calculations on the HMRC website if you go to have a look at the guidance. So there will be, so it is likely that they have an example that will suit yours, but we're just going to go through a really basic example here. So what we're looking at here is fixed hour workers. And we're going to go through how you would calculate the furlough hours and how you would then calculate their furlough pay. So for fixed hours workers, you would need to take whatever is on their contract at the time in the pay period before the 19th of March. So for this purpose, we've got a fixed hour worker who's on 40 hours a week. And for those 40 hours a week, they usually receive £2,000 a month. So what you would do is take your contractual hours and also the working pattern. So it could be that you have someone that works 40 hours across 8 days or 40 hours across 4 days. Whatever is your working pattern, that's what you need to know. So for this person, they're working 40 hours over 7 days. In order to work out your calculation, you'll need to know that fixed kind of hours and the kind of pay period, how much pay they're getting for those hours, and then you need to know the furlough period. So for the purposes of this example, we've got this employee was furloughed from the 1st of May, and they have now had their contract changed to a flexible furlough from the 1st of July. And so for this example, we actually did change this. Oh yeah. So for this example, we've got the person is going to be working 25 hours per week as a furlough, and then the rest of that is furlough. So what you would take is your number of usual hours for the month, and in order to get the usual hours, which is the new buzzword in this guidance, you would take your 40 hours a week and divide it by 7. And then you would times it by 31 to get your new kind of total usual hours for the period that you're claiming for. And with this calculation, you always round up to the nearest whole number. So 40 hours divided by the 7 days, which is their normal fixed hour period, times by the calendar days in the month, and in July there's 31, will give you 178 rounded usual hours for the month. Now, in that period, the number of hours that the employee actually works, and make sure that you know they're actually going to work it, or you've waited until you've actually worked it in case you have any changes before you make your claim. The number of actual working hours they've done is 108. So your furlough hours will be the usual hours, 178, minus 108, which was their working hours, to give you 70 furlough hours. Now, both sets of your hours calculations need to be kept in your records, and the actual working hours need to be reported on the payroll and the payslip. So make sure that you are keeping all of those hours, and also make sure that you're giving those hours through for payroll, because the employee will need to see that on their payslip, and HMRC might expect to see that if they were to audit you in future. So that's the first part of your calculation. So we'll go through to the next part, which is the actual wage. So as you know, an employee's furlough wage is 80% of their normal salary, unless they have earned more than 2,500, in which case it's capped at that. In this example, the person earns £2,000 a month. So we would take £2,000 and times it by 80% to get their maximum furlough wage for the month of £1,600. Now, for the flexible furlough pay, you would take their maximum furlough wage, which is £1,600. You would times it by their furlough hours, which was 70, and divide it by their usual hours, which was 178. And that will give you £629.21 for their furlough pay. For their actual hours, you would just take those 108 hours that we had before, and you would just times that by their normal hourly rate. And obviously there's a national minimum wage there that applies, which should have been the case anyway. Just remember that if their normal hourly wage before the start of their furlough period was the national minimum wage, remember that's increased in the new tax year. So with this amount, then you would take that 629.21 as your claim amount. In July, you can claim that full furlough amount in the grant, but in later months, well, in September and October, you'll need to then reduce that further. But remember, so for July, the claim stays the same in that you can still claim your employer's national insurance and employer's pension for the furlough period or flexible furlough period. And then remember that that amount needs to be prorated down to match that flexible furlough amount. And that going forward in August, obviously, you won't have the employer's national insurance and employer's pension. And then September and October, you've got it reduced. You've got the actual furlough amount reduced by 10% and 20% respectively. So the other thing to remember is, whilst you might have earnings periods that cross over calendar months, from July, you can only make claims within single calendar months. So you can make smaller claims. For example, you could claim for a smaller period than the furlough period is, but you can't claim across tax months now because the guidance is changing each month, or rather the rules are changing each month. So that's just a really basic payroll calculation. I think probably what we'll do now is go through to questions.
Yeah, there's just a brief summary, which Monica, do you just want to run through the summary?
Yes, of course. Yes. So to summarise, and thank you for that, Katie, is furloughed staff will be able to return to work part-time from the 1st of July. Employers will need to pay them in full for the time that they work, and the rest of the time will still be funded by the government up to a cap. And the government contributions to the scheme are going to change from the 1st of August. So again, quite some big changes, significant changes, but again, hopefully this will be beneficial for businesses and enable them to, work on the fact they're getting their staff slowly back into the work as we get back to what we call the new normal. And this will enable them to have some financial support during that could be quite difficult time.
Thanks, Monica. Okay, so yeah, we have had a lot of questions come through, so we're going to do our best to get back to as many as we can. So if we start with the first question that has come through, the first question is, do you believe that you can claim notice pay paid at the normal notice pay rate under the furlough scheme?
Okay, so the answer to that one is yes, depending on what is in your employment contract, but generally it's fine. So that depends on whether you're talking about redundancy or just straight notice. If it's straight notice, the answer is yes, but obviously only 80%, and you will have to top up the remaining 20%. Redundancy pay is different, but I know there's some redundancy questions coming up, so we'll touch on that during that.
Thank you. The next has got quite a few questions come through, so if I just ask them one at a time. Number one, can we ask staff members to take holiday during their furlough period? And if so, do they get paid at the 80% furlough amount for those holidays during furlough period?
Okay, so again, yes, you can. That depends on what is in your employment contract or your holiday policy in reference to the notice period you have to give them. The second question I know is related to the notice period. So they would get paid 100% and you're able to reclaim 80.
And if you only paid 80%, then they wouldn't actually be taking holiday there. You'd have to carry forward that holiday.
Number 3, from July, if we bring in staff members back to work from furlough for a short time and then take them back to furlough, I understand that they need to work at least 7 days minimum in the month. Is this 7 days a continuous 7 days of work, or can it be broken down into different days in the month?
It can be broken down. 7
Okay.
days is the minimum that you can make a claim for, but it can be broken down into fixed periods or even hours.
Perfect, thank you. And then how would you point 3 above relate to a part-timer who normally works 4 days a week? So obviously it can be broken down.
Yeah, so that again, go on.
No, that's fine. Sorry, what was you going to say?
Yeah, so pro rata, effectively the same way as you do with holiday and everything else.
Perfect. What are the thoughts on notice of redundancy running alongside furlough claims on full pay topped up?
This one's a really specific question. I'd probably say it would be better to have a consultation with us to go through, because it depends on length of service as to whether redundancy applies. A number of clients that we're helping at the moment or over the last couple of weeks have been very much looking at what happens next in terms of redundancies. So there are a number of companies starting that process now while the job retention scheme is still available for the notice pay element of it. But it's something that it would be better to go into more detail into the individual circumstances for.
Okay, so we can follow up on that question, or Martin
it is possible.
can follow up on that. Okay, perfect, thank you. Next question, is it possible to bring somebody from furlough part-time in June?
No, not if you want to use the job retention scheme.
What you could do is you could finish their furlough period, they could come back for a few days, and then you could start them on furlough again later on if you needed to, but you wouldn't be able to claim for the few days that they are working.
Next question, with flexible furlough and the minimum period of 7 calendar days, does this have to be consecutive days? Oh, or can it be 7 days? I think we've answered that question, haven't we? 7 days within a working month.
Yeah, it can be throughout the month. It doesn't need to be that they work 7 consecutive days.
Okay. Next question. When working out average hours worked, when the pay depends on the number of hours worked for usual pay, do you include holiday hours they have been paid?
Yes, if they are someone on variable pay, then holiday hours is part of their contractual hours that should be included within the usual hours calculation. If it's someone that is normally they're salaried and they're contracted for a normal amount of hours, and for whatever reason they had some holiday paid on top, maybe they had some left over, you wouldn't include that.
Thank you. I have an employee returning from SMP who did not agree to furlough until the 15th of June, but their SMP ended on the 17th of May. Do I start their furlough on the 15th of June or backdate?
Julia, so I've seen who asked that question. In relation to backdating, it depends what's in your documentation when you send it through to them. So providing you requested it around the time they were due to end their SMP, and it's just because the employer's only just agreed, you can backdate, providing your documentation states the date that they were going on to furlough from.
Perfect, thank you. I have an employee who has been on continual furlough since April, and we need her to do some work this month. Can I end her furlough for a few days and then restart it again?
Yes, you can.
Provided the employee agrees to it, of course.
Perfect, thank you. Can the company make staff on furlough take annual leave whilst on furlough so that they don't come back to work with a lot of outstanding leave?
Provided you give them the correct notice, yeah. But you would need to top up those days to 100% of pay.
Someone's asked a payroll calculation, Katie, so I don't know if you may want to follow up on this, but the question is, if the employee works Monday to Friday, would you divide by 5 and still multiply by 31, or would that change?
No, you would be dividing by the calendar days within that working period. So if someone works 40 hours a week, Monday to Friday, it's considered across the calendar week. 40 hours a week would be divided by 7 then and multiplied, and multiplied by 31. The reason they kind of put that in place is because if people work shift patterns, someone works say 40 hours over 8 days or different shift patterns like that, trying to make sure that that's as fair as possible.
Okay. Assuming my employees are on flexible contracts, typically working 10-hour days, can I furlough and unfurlough members day by day with agreement from them and apply the same rationale to claim?
So in terms of putting them back on furlough, you can. That's the idea of having the flexible furlough scheme, again, providing you've got agreement for them. And again, providing that you've made the 7 total days over the calendar month, yes.
Okay. Is this correct under flexible furlough? Employee must work a minimum for 7 days in the calendar month. We've already answered that. Is it still possible to bring employees in and out of furlough from July? Is there still a 3 weeks minimum or does that change?
It's providing they've been on furlough for 3 weeks minimum during the period from when the job retention scheme started. So no 3-week minimum this time.
Yeah, so any employees that had already been in the scheme can be taken in and out after July.
We are paid on the 15th of the month for the month. If we need an employee to work additional hours later in the month, how do we account for this?
So, I mean, from the looks of it, it looks like you can do that. That's fine. It would need to go through on the payroll it would need to go through on the payroll though. So it really depends on whether you know that the work hours are going to happen or if you need to wait for them to happen in case there's a question mark on it as to which payroll you put it through on. But you just need to remember that when you're making your claim, you might need to, if you know that this needs to go through, for example, in July, and you've already had your July payroll run, you might need to have a rerun to rework the hours for your claim, or if you have adequate documentation of the hours, then you might just need to do that claim calculation outside of the payroll to put it through. The main thing is that you need to make sure that you're putting it through for the right month claim period, because if you are claiming for some hours that were worked in July, for example, you couldn't put it through in August because you won't get the employer's national insurance and employer's pension for the furlough bit of that employee. It gets quite complicated employee to employee situation. I would say what we found is that HMRC's web advice has been working really quite quickly to come back to you on specific examples, much quicker than if you were to call them, which at the moment you could be on the phone for hours.
Okay. Can an employee who is furloughed go on paternity leave and then come back onto furlough immediately after? And what can we claim for?
So that depends on when it happens, but yes, they can go on paternity leave while they're on furlough, and then go back onto furlough afterwards. You would be able to claim the 80% back, obviously, for the furlough, depending on what point of the scheme we're looking at as to when they go on paternity. In terms of the paternity leave itself, obviously that's a set amount by the government, so that again depends on what's in the policies.
You can claim 92% of the statutory paternity amount, which happens automatically through your PAYE and ICE payment each month.
For a minimum number of 7 days rule, what is a day when flexible hours?
I need a bit more context on that question. I think what you're asking is, they're talking about calendar days. So they're saying a minimum number of calendar days, and how people work across those days. Yeah, from what I can see, they can work any number of hours within a day. But what you need to have recorded is which days they have worked. I think that's about right. Would you say, Martin?
It depends if they're on a set rota. So, for example, let's use a restaurant that's part-time. So, and you've got someone that's front of house, for example, that does 4 hours a day, then that technically would class as their day. If they're completely flexible, i.e. they're on a 0-hour contract, it would be based on the average over the last 12 months, or the average number of hours worked per day, the exact month 12 months ago, depending on which is higher. Quite a specific question again, so probably best to have a chat offline.
Yeah.
Do I need to raise new furlough paperwork for an employee? Sorry, was you going to say something, Katie?
No.
Oh, do I need to raise new furlough paperwork for an employee if I plan to use the new flexible furlough scheme?
Yes, best practice is to get it in writing every time you put them back on furlough, even if it's for a day. You have to have ideally written agreement is best practice. So yeah, it would be a different type of letter than the one you will have used before. But yes, it's best to get it every time.
However, if they've put someone already onto a flexible furlough scheme, they don't need to get a new agreement every time someone works some of those hours, do they? It's just if they.
No, it's every time they put them on furlough.
Yeah.
Okay. Can we claim in arrears so we assure what hours employees have worked or been furloughed?
Yes, you can. You just need to be aware that obviously your payment will come through 6 working days after you've claimed. So HMRC are saying that you can't actually make a claim for the new scheme earlier than the 18th of July. When you make your claim, at the moment, it seems to be slightly open-ended. Although they have put a deadline on the current scheme, the latest you can claim for that. But it's probably best that you claim in arrears to make sure you're sure of what has been paid. But then you just need to consider how your business's cash flow works.
Okay. If a staff member had their contract changed from a 5-day week to a 4-day week on the 1st of April 2020, i.e. 20% less working hours, and they were put on furlough, can we still claim based on the salary on the 19th of March 2020, i.e. the 5-day week, or should we claim 80% of the new contract amount?
So for the period from the 19th of March to the 1st of April, you would claim on the 5-day week. On the 1st of April, you'd claim on the 4-day week because that's their new contractual amount.
Regarding this is a question for Katie. Regarding the actual payslip showing the actual hours worked and the furlough hours worked, how should we report this to ourselves, and can we amend our current spreadsheet that they send us?
So yes, if you amend the current spreadsheet to show furlough hours and actual hours, that's the best way to send that information to us. What we'll be showing on the payslip will be the actual hours. In terms of the furlough hours, it will show as an amount, but on your report, we'd be able to show furlough hours if you needed that. The main thing is to make sure that you've got your the main thing is to make sure that you've got your records of the hours, and then for the payslip, actual hours need to be reported as hours. The furlough hours don't actually have to be shown as hours, though. They can just be shown as an amount.
Okay, that's actually it for the questions that we've had come through. So anyone that we have said, or Martin has said that he'll follow up as it's a more specific question, Martin can drop you an email to arrange a time to schedule in a call with you. If there is anything that you would like to follow up on, either with myself, Katie, or Martin, when I send out the follow-up email tomorrow, I will include both of my email address, but also Martin's email address, and we can arrange for anything to be filtered through appropriately from then. But thank you so much for dialing in this morning. We hope that we've been able to cover and answer all of the questions that you might have had prior to the session today. I know that there was a lot that was covered, so the recording should hopefully help if you need to refer back to anything at any point. But that's all from myself, unless Martin or Katie, you want to add anything further?
No, I haven't got anything else to add. Just if you do have questions, do send them through. But please be aware that HMRC has covered every example in their guidance, and they will really be the best resource possible to start with. And then when it comes to actually submitting your payroll information, if you think that you need some information processed earlier, then send your information in earlier and let your payroll contact know, because we will have everything, planned to our usual schedules. So if you need something earlier, do let us know and give us that notice.
Perfect. Thank you so much, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and week. Keep staying safe, and hopefully we'll see you all on our next webinar. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.